This conference will now be recorded.
So yoga and psychology, we have been continuing. We finished up to consciousness, and then we took up, I think after consciousness, what did we do? Emotions, right? Yeah, altering consciousness, that's where we were, and now learning. Okay. So we saw some things in some of these slides in the class already. That is the definition of learning, which is a permanent change in your knowledge or behavior, such as a child putting hand in the fire learns, and once it learns, that's about it. So it's just a change in the behavior permanently. Then we looked at different models, I thought, of learning, how the behaviorists look at learning. That is, we looked at classical conditioning, wherein Pavlov's dog experiment, where originally a neutral stimulus, such as a bell, then becomes a conditioned stimulus to bring the unconditioned, the effect that the unconditioned stimulus, such as food, brings, that is the salivation. Then we looked at the effect of such classical conditioning and as a practical application in cases of PTSD and phobias. Please mute your phone. Shubha, you can mute all and then unmute me. That way it will be easy.
Okay, Ashwini.
Okay, so that way everybody begins muted. Okay, so we saw that. We saw classical conditioning with Pavlov's dog, and then we went to operant conditioning, and we looked at the Skinner's box, the way how animals or any being learn by simply initially chancing upon a certain lever or a key to release the food, and then you know that it happens. In fact, many of our discoveries, or even some of the like the age-old medicine of Ayurveda, for example, has been also mostly, people come across by chance. They eat and they find out that there is an effect of eating that in a positive or negative, and they figure out. Of course, a lot of bad experiments have gone through. We have gone through as humans, as animals, overall in nature, to learn. So that's, I guess, failure is a stepping stone for success, as they say, and that is pretty much how we learn operant conditioning. So there has been positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement in learning. So we looked at that also. Positive reinforcement is not necessarily positive in the sense of the effect of being positive. It simply strengthens the response. Negative reinforcement weakens the response. So that is the idea. Such praising a child, we consider it as positive reinforcement, because especially praising a child for doing positive things, that is. And there can be positive reinforcement for a child if someone encouraged wrong behavior. For example, the drug addicts or alcohol. There are friends who really encourage that behavior, and they become friends, and they develop social interaction and things like that, and that becomes a positive reinforcement for that youth or a child, so to say, to continue that behavior. So positive reinforcement has to be given for the positive work, such as doing their homework and achieving their results, whereas there is negative reinforcement for a child who, say, doesn't do his homework. That can be initially okay as long as it is not too negative. But what the modern parenting approach has been to not be too negative in their approach of reinforcement of the behavior, because that negative reinforcement can turn positive, because the more you punish the child, the more the child ignores and probably even rebels and continues the behavior. So this is what we discussed, and then we can go into different learning modes. Um, what are the different ways in which we learn? Like we said, observation or insight, watching, mimicking others, all these different ways of learning. One of the main things that we all have is some kind of an insight. We don't know how, but an idea pops up. This is not just humans, by the way. They have done this experiment on chimps. They put the food very high and they let the chimps figure out, and they tried going around finding everywhere. Somehow they could not figure out where the food was, and then they waited, they contemplated for a while, and then suddenly some idea popped up into their head, and they just figured out how to get that food. And they knew where the food was, but they just didn't know how to get that. And then they used a chair to stand and knock down the food. So that is the way they figured out. So if chimps can learn, we also can learn that way. Monkeys, for example, learn by watching. They found out that the monkeys that were grown up in lab were let out, and they saw these other monkeys in the forest being scared of the snake, and they said, okay, this must be something that we have to be scared of. They didn't know what monkey was, but they learned to be scared of by watching these forest monkeys. And for the most part, our children also learn all these various behaviors from the parent or others that are around. And that's why pretty much we say that whatever happens in the house, that cultural or behavioral conditioning is the highest conditioning for life, unless they, as adults, try to undo that to some extent. In what is learning as per yoga and ancient science, there is this shloka, Acharya padam adatte padam shishyasva medhaya padam brahmachari padam kala kramena cha. That is 1/4 we learn from the teacher, where here teacher usually is parent. In the beginning it can be a teacher, elders can be a teacher in the house, and then when the child goes to school, it is the teachers in the school that are teachers, and so forth. And 1/4 we learn from peers, basically. And this is not an recent one, okay? So we learn from, this is Gurukul sort of way, right? There also they learn from Sabrahmachari Bihi. That is the peers, not necessarily peers in a school setting, but even friends that we develop. We learn a lot from them. And 1/4 is our own intelligence, meaning what we just saw in the previous slide. 1/4 is our own insight, basically, that we develop as we grow up or even otherwise. And 1/4 somehow we learn. It's a very nice statement there, kala kramena cha. That is, they did not attribute everything to a known mode of learning. Some of the learning simply happens. We don't know how. Very beautifully open-ended. 1/4 of the learning is left open-ended because it can be in many ways that are not completely defined. And even here in the previous slide, we saw that they said some of the learning happens, some ideas pop up, and so forth. And I think modern psychology also is trying to figure out, and although they have come up with various theories, they still know very well that it's not a concluded idea here in terms of the modes of learning. So that discussion is on too. Now coming to the modern, again, yoga and learning. When it comes to learning, I think yogic sages have done phenomenal work in terms of psychology of learning. How do we know what we know is what basically learning is all about. And we in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, we see that there is an elaboration of how we know what we know, and it's not even any first of its kind text here. Even the Vedantic and the Upanishadic texts also have elaborated enormously on this epistemology, is what the science is called. Nowadays they use the word epistemology, but it's basically Pramana Shastra. It's a part of Nyaya Shastra, and it's very ancient knowledge. I don't know if there is a date that we can put here. Probably I can only say thousands of years BCE. That is the ancients, how early this knowledge has been around. What that means is that they have systematically approached the science of learning. How do we know what we know? Pramana, Viparyaya, Vikalpa, Nidra, Smritayaha is the word that Patanjali uses. That is even like, this is not even how we know what we know. It is what kinds of knowledges are there. What are the different types of modes of modification of mind there is. Like we already saw, learning is a permanent change of the knowledge and behavior. That is the definition of learning even in the modern psychology. Now, permanent change in the behavior, does that mean that what we know is always correct? Not necessarily, right? Sometimes somebody gives us wrong information and we can very well act upon that for whole life, like PTSD, for example, or phobias that we may develop. Phobia for a cat or a lizard or something which may have never bitten us, but we have that, and that we continue for life. So it's not necessary that the knowledge is always right knowledge. So pramana is right knowledge, and viparyaya is a wrong knowledge. Seeing a ghost on a post, seeing a snake on the rope. These are some of the analogies or that have been used to explain this phenomenon. So we do have different kinds of knowledge, so to say, and that has been elaborated. So we'll just simply look at that. Pramana, the right knowledge. Viparyaya, the wrong knowledge. Vikalpa is the imaginary knowledge. We arrive at things somehow, and like what we just saw with chimps, somehow they were able to figure out how to bring the food down from where it was by using the chair. That is the we can say the right way of figuring out. But sometimes we also contemplate and arrive at some imaginary knowledge. Shabda jnananupati, vastu shunyo vikalpaha. That is, we have the knowledge or the knowledge of the words, for example, like say an elephant, and we know we have a knowledge of flying, but we can arrive at some vikalpa or imaginary knowledge that the flying elephant can be the vikalpa. But this is very at the outset it seems like, okay, all right, what are you trying to say? It doesn't sound like it's something profound, but when you apply this into metaphysics in terms of spiritual knowledge, the entire world can be a vikalpa, right? So basically many of the things that we think can be vikalpa, and it has been one of the very vastly explored topic in yoga, in the yoga philosophy. So don't discount it as a simply just one-liner. Okay, it's basically an imaginary knowledge, but it is basically looked at in a very deep way. As you start contemplating, you will start categorizing your own thoughts into these, and eventually you will arrive at, okay, am I thinking, is this real or is this imaginary? So you will start getting into these realms of being able to see what is the world here. How much do we really see, and do we really know what we know, or how much is the knowledge that is vikalpa? For the most part, our own imaginary knowledge, the whole world that we have so to say, we have an idea of the world, we have an idea of reality, and is this real, is this pramana? That's why there is also another Sanskrit word called yathartha bhava, that is yatha artha, the way it is, seeing the way it is basically how yogis finally become established in the correct knowledge. But most of us are actually in vikalpa state, we can say, or in nidra or in smriti. So let's see what those are. So nidra is the absence of knowledge. That is when we sleep. There is there is, we know that we don't know. That is basically, again, it's another very vast and very deep exploration of the concept of nidra has been done in yoga and in Vedanta. So when I say yoga, I also mean Vedanta. So we should not be, in fact, distinguishing between the two. The whole science of yoga and Vedanta are quite similar or same, except only in the very final states where things can be slightly different in the way it has been explained and it has been seen. So nidra is another very highly explored science here. It's not necessarily sleep alone, it's also absence of knowledge. How do I know that there is no pot here? Absence of pot. When did the absence of pot begin? These are all some of the anadi, like we say, right? Avidya also to some extent gets into nidra. Later we can see that. But absence of knowledge is basically how nidra is seen as. But it's not just simply absence of knowledge. It is knowing the absence of knowledge. Like, say, you know that you slept. So how do you know you slept? And that too, we know we slept well or we did not sleep well. So there is a lot of analysis of this absence of knowledge here. So let's park it at this point. Smriti, for example, the next one is Smriti, where we talk about the memory of what we have experienced, the past impressions of knowledge. Here too, again, this subject also is explored quite a bit. And smriti can also eventually be our own storehouse of latent impressions, the vasanas based on which we act. It also can be linked to the id of Freud, we can say. That is smriti. So these are 5 modes of knowledge and 5 types of knowledge, we can say. And then now, what are the different modes of learning or knowing this knowledge? So let us come to pramana, especially pramana. That's where that is where we learn, right? We get information. So how do we get the information? How do we know what we know? One is pratyaksha, that is we see. I see a pot, so I know there is a pot. That is called direct perception. Anumana, there is a fire in the mountain. Did you see it? No, but I'm seeing the smoke. So then there must be fire. So that is the inference, indirect perception. And agama, that is, okay, sun rises in the east every day. Like, pretty much that's the known fact. How? Do you see that the sun rises in the east every day? Have you seen it tomorrow if the sun rises in the east? No. But then how do you know sun rises in the east? So that is the knowledge. How did you get that knowledge? Because for millennia, people have been saying sun rises in the east, and I trust that authority. So that is the agama philosophy. Agama or shabda pramana is another word used for that. Shabda is the words, basically words of the wise and words of authority. So science, for example, is also shabda pramana. But again, this can be discussed heavily on what kind of knowledge, and is yesterday's knowledge still good today, and so forth. But the definition of agama is it has to be an authority, and if you go with the right authority, then it has to be true. The idea, however, here is it applies more towards the spiritual knowledge. So hence what they say is that once you go with the realized and the wise, then this has to be true. And say Vedas, for example, are taken as the authority for the spiritual sadhana. If you do not do that, for example, sorry, if you do not do that, what happens? Can you still figure out, can you chance upon the knowledge? Absolutely, you can chance upon the knowledge, but in a forest, can you? It's like saying, in a forest, can you figure out how to go from one place to the other place? Yes, you can, as long, but it might have taken you, say, a whole year to go from one place to the other place. And if you had a right information, you can go from one place to the other place in just about, say, a day. So that is the reason why agama is placed a high importance in Vedanta and in yoga, because somebody has tracked that path already. The sages have already tracked, and they have said, here is how you can go, and this is how you can meet a certain destination. But if you did not, you can still figure out. You may meet many dangers, and eventually, if you survive all those dangers in this life or whichever life that could be, you may eventually reach there. But is that what you want, or is there some better way? So agama or shabda pramana is considered as the most, or the most efficient way, the best way to approach yogic science. In the same manner, we also would like to go with the apta vakya, is another word, can be used in the transactional world. You want to trust an apta. Apta means somebody who is a good friend of yours, or somebody who is a mentor. Go with their suggestion, and then hopefully you have a better chance of knowing what you want to know. So these are all the ancient ways of how people have explored the same thing that the modern psychology has explored. They are doing experiments such as Pavlov's dog or Skinner's box, various such experiments to find out different modes of learning. Whereas the yogis, mostly their research was the inner study of their own mind and contemplation to arrive at all these. And of course, debate. Let's not forget that. Okay. So then comes the idea of intelligence. Now, modern psychology, we have to switch the context. In modern psychology, human intelligence has been defined as the ability to think, learn, experience, solve problems, and adapt to new situations. If we want to give 5, you can still go for more, but let's take these 5. Think, learn from experience, that is, sorry, 4. Think, ability to learn from experience, ability to solve the problems, and ability to adapt to new situations. These are 4 key factors to be able to define human intelligence. There are many categories and various ways they have explored intelligence, they have done a phenomenal job here. So let's look at some of it. This is not an exhaustive topic here. It's an exhaustive topic, but here we don't cover it in a very exhaustive way. Please feel free to read upon this. Even our manual also has enough in there that has been given, so take a look at that. So general intelligence and specific intelligence is the large classification here. In case of general intelligence, the idea here is to acquire knowledge, adapt to novel situations, and learn from experience. That is that's how general intelligence is defined. In case of specific intelligence, one may narrow it down to a certain domain, and maybe I'm very intelligent when it comes to math, and when it comes to social sciences I may be pretty much much lower than average. So that's possible too. So that is the specific intelligence here. Also, different types of intelligence, let us look at them. Fluid intelligence, that is some people have capacity to learn new things, so that is versatility, we can say, is fluid intelligence. Crystallized intelligence, that is acquire worldly facts and figures. So these are in case of fluid intelligence, you see that the youngsters have this fluid intelligence, whereas as the population, as the person gets older, they have crystallized intelligence. They are probably more intelligent in terms of crystallized intelligence. They are better than the youngsters, but they lack in fluid intelligence because they have acquired enough worldly facts and figures, but they may not be able to learn new things. And let us explore this when it comes to yoga and yogic sadhana. You want to, which one do you think is better? That is, do you want to just simply be having a crystallized intelligence, or do you want to be fluid, more into, of course, there's nothing like this or that. You want to have more and more crystallized intelligence too, but you want to be fluid in your intelligence because you want to have the capacity to learn new things. What we call Zen mind, the beginner's mind. There's one book which I was reading, The Beginner's Mind. The idea is to be full of wanting to learn, full of curiosity, and full of um, remove the stuck mind. That is, maybe you have grown up with certain uh, conditioning. Maybe the world was in a certain way. If we adapt and learn to accept the change in the ways, and let go of our hardened thoughts and hardened feelings, then there is a lot that we can learn, even if we are old. And I see that among the sages that at least I have met. For example, I want to really bring Swami Bodhananda here, and every year we see him bringing so many new things, and it just, the knowledge is as if he's just learned something new. It's just amazing to see him getting younger and younger with respect to learning and intelligence. So it's possible, if you try and maintain that constant inquisitiveness, your fluid intelligence can remain quite sharp, and you don't have to feel that now that we are catching up with age, we don't have to worry about um, becoming sharp in fluid intelligence. Oh no, we are set. We don't have to give up like that, is all I wanted to say here. And yoga teaches us that, especially. And it says, you will, with a Zen mind, with every moment being fresh and new for us, with meditation and with yoga and with mindfulness, our fluid intelligence should be as good as a youngster. So that is the application I wanted to bring here. Now let's move on to analytical intelligence, creative intelligence, and practical intelligence. We all know what analytical intelligence is. When a problem is given to us in any field, it doesn't have to be a problem in math, but whether it's a problem with, it's a new gadget, or trying to figure out, trying to open some, and or assemble something new, whatever that could be, in that also, just trying to figure out how to do that may have analysis, or simply analysis of a complex subject. That is the analytical intelligence there. Now, creative intelligence and practical intelligence, let's look at that. Creative intelligence is about these things. That is, one is expertise. You definitely need expertise in the domain to be creative. And then imaginative thinking, it's out of the box thinking also. That is, if you want to be creative, you want to not only know how things exist, but you should not be crystallized in that. You should be able to take it out of the box and imagine various things. You should also be a risk taker for you to be creative. If you are the paranoia usually shuts our creativity down. So be a risk taker. That happens again for a yogi and for spiritual sadhaka. Risk taking becomes easy because we the mula, we don't live in Muladhara Chakra at that point. We are not insecure. It doesn't mean that the world is now suddenly becoming a better place to live. No, but simply because we are accepting the world as it is and we are ready to move on. So that makes us more creative. I'm basically applying all of these to our yoga sadhana, because that first of all makes it interesting for you to learn. Otherwise psychology becomes very boring. And the other also reason is that we want this entire field of psychology that we are exploring and learning, of course not entire field, whatever little field that we are touching upon, to also become a way for us to apply in our yoga, both as therapy as well as when you are mentoring somebody, or when you are even doing your own sadhana. You will know that creativity is one of the biggest advantages, or rather benefits of practicing yoga. And we have seen that in our Bhagavad Gita explanation also, in in the Bhagavad Gita manual, where we have said the definition. In case of definition of yoga, one of them becomes siddhi. We achieve siddhi. That is, one of it is power of creativity that we developed, and that is because of this risk taking becoming just our intrinsically possible for us. So that is the application there. Now going to the next topic here, next bullet, intrinsic interest. So what happens here is that when we have, this is true whether we are a yoga sadhaka or not, when we are creative, when we are interested in a given topic, when we are passionate about something, we become creative, because that is something we want to do and we badly want to do. And if we are not able to achieve that's even better. If we are not able to reach there fast enough, high enough, well enough, then that is even better, I would like to say this, because that way we become more creative. That way we become more we develop more intrinsic interest in that, because somehow or the other we want to achieve something, and that should not go. When that is there, no matter what, and especially slight setbacks actually help you in becoming more creative, and your interest simply keeps on growing in that. The harder the better, because if it becomes very easy, then we lose interest pretty quickly. So the intrinsic interest in a given subject or a given field is also one of the traits for becoming creative. Next is working in a creative environment. So if you alone are trying to figure that out, sooner or later you lose interest. So creating that environment around you, or joining an environment around you that is conducive to your given field, also helps you become more creative. Types of intelligence right here. This is one of the tables I found. Linguistic intelligence, logico-mathematical intelligence, spatial intelligence, that is ability to think and reason about objects in 3 dimensions, musical intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, that is ability to move the body in sports, dance, and other physical activities, interpersonal, ability to understand and interact effectively with others, intrapersonal, ability to have insight into oneself, and naturalistic, ability to recognize, identify, and understand animals, plants, and other living things. So these are some of the categories. Please go through this slide. Let's move on. Biology of intelligence. Is intelligence in brain? Is the question. Is it in the brain? Yes. The answer is yes, but not wholly yes. Larger the brain size, the better the intelligence, is one of the correlations they have found. The number of, also not the brain size alone, but the number of neurons in the brain is important. You can have a very big brain size, but then if the number of neurons are less, we can also see that in some of the learning, kids with learning, or some of the congenital disorders, children, they would have very big head, but actually they would be congenitally having learning disabilities and all. That amounts to number of neurons in the brain that they may be lacking, or thickness of the cortex of the brain. that also contributes to the intelligence. And growing up in a higher stimulating environment. If you don't grow up in a stimulating environment, then no matter what and how great your brain is in its biology, in its physiology, you will still not be able to learn. And there has been an experiment done with Siamese babies. I hope you know this. These babies were very they were orphan babies, and they were put in a very nice environment with everything was just fantastic. But then the nurses pretty much did not pay a lot of attention to the babies. They were left on their own in the cradle, whereas there was a nearby very not shabby sort of orphanage where the babies were not having great environment around them, but then there were people playing with the babies and they were stimulated enough, and those children were showed a much higher capacity for learning and for intelligence, whereas the Siamese babies were pretty much they did not understand. The intelligence was way low. So that has been studied. So you can see that the stimulation in the childhood especially becomes very important. And it's important for us to know this, because this will be a great for us, it will be a great knowledge to work with parenting when it comes to children, yoga for children, and also talking to the parents. You want to teach, and prenatal yoga is another place where you talk about this and help parents understand that giving them good stimulation is very important. Many of the parents, of course, in most of the Indian parents, and even nowadays most of them are into stimulating the children, but there were days, just even say 30-40 years ago, children were pretty much, they did not understand this, and children were put in separate rooms to sleep, and most of the time parent was not giving attention. Most of us are busy with work, and we leave children in daycare and nannies and things like that, and nannies hardly bother to stimulate the child. All these exist in the modern parenting situations. So it's important to educate the parents about this. Intelligent people frequently show less brain activity. This is the most beautiful thing that I came across. That is, we think that we should be constantly, the brain activity has to be huge when it comes to solving a problem. Actually, they have seen that it shows less brain activity. They also said the faster that they can think faster, but that was very funny sentence, because what is the meaning of they can think faster? If they saw less brain activity, that is really a biological, neurological definition. That is, the signals in the brain were not, like centers of the brain were not showing, like MRI or fMRI as they call it, did not show a lot of activity. But they can think faster does not mean that the connection from one neuron to the other neuron, that connection speed is more. That is not said. So this says a lot. That means if the neuron, the signal from one neuron to the other neuron, if it takes the same amount of time for everybody, and if an intelligent person can be seen to have less brain activity, what exactly is happening there? Here the intelligent person has mastered the ability to think in the right direction without distraction. That is probably how we would like to define when as a yogi, that is probably how we want to define, but I hope my definition is correct. The idea here is that the neurons, as we start exploring, say, a topic, for example, we are reading a book. The first time we read that particular chapter will take longer, but the second time we read, we take shorter time. That's because now the neurons have learned to think and to act in a certain way, and then onwards it becomes easy for us. The brain activity probably second time is lesser, because we have developed the pattern to learn. to think in that direction. That is how I see it. And if we taught our children, and if we taught even in yoga also, yoga for children, if we taught them how to learn, that is, if we made them understand that any kind of learning is a matter of repetition, which modern education system does not focus on. They pretty much focus on learning, but they don't tell them that repeated memorizing, repeated practice, that is abhyasena tu kaunteya, abhyasena. So the abhyasa part is missing. Repetition is missing in the modern education. The emphasis on repetition is missing. So we see that if we did the same thing over and over and over again, we become better. That is when there is less brain activity, because not because the brain becomes numb or the brain becomes less efficient, but because it becomes more efficient, and it simply knows how to direct the neuronal traffic in the right direction. So this is one of the most important things to know here. And then comes the subject of nature and nurture. How do we learn? Is it how are we so intelligent? Meaning, whatever intelligence we have, whatever be the IQ we have, how did we get that? Did we get that by simply nature or nurture? We already looked at the previous slide. The answer is both. That is, higher stimulating environment in our childhood would make us intelligent, but more important than that is the nature. Genetic plays a very big role in intelligence, and this is what modern psychology has said, that the IQ differences, in case of IQ differences, nature matters. But then that doesn't actually mean that everybody who is born with high IQ is going to be successful, and everybody with slightly lower or average IQ is going to be less successful. That is one other thing that for us to know, because apart from IQ, there also is EQ, the emotional intelligence. So while IQ gives us some, it gives us some leverage to proceed in learning. If the IQ is not supplemented with a good EQ, the chances are that a person with a higher IQ, especially they say gifted kind of kids, have a much bigger chances of failure than the person with an average or above average intelligence, but not super high intelligence. This is something we have to know and understand, the dangers of very high IQ without having a good enough emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is the key to success, actually. So what is emotional intelligence? Accurately identify, assess, and understand the emotions. So that is, we all carry emotions, but for the most part, we do not have the ability to understand our emotions, or we don't place significant emphasis on that aspect, especially when it comes to children and youth, because they act instinctively as children. As children, that is how they are. They are more like animals, we can say, because they have they have less restraint and less, I should say, control over their impulses. But as we see them grow, they develop the ability to look at their emotions, and in a good family, they are taught to understand their emotions correctly. But in many cases, we also impose a lot of inhibitions, such as, oh, you have to behave in a certain way. Without allowing their emotional intelligence, we suppress their intelligence, or their their emotional intelligence. Being able to rationalize, or give them enough rational, I would say, enough analysis of why they should behave in a certain way. We simply say behaving this way is bad, and just simply in a very negative reinforcement way. When that is done, when they are disciplined, without explanation, without a proper fostering environment, they become, in fact, their emotional intelligence is curtailed. So if we work with them slowly and help them assess their own emotions, the chances are that they become much more emotionally intelligent by the time they are adults. So we have to understand that as yogis, as yoga teachers, or as yoga therapists, if we come across children and youth who behave in a impulsive way, and if that is something we have seen as the problem, and they have been brought to you that way, you may want to work on that to be able to help them discover their own emotions, and they can unfold themselves much better. Because we are seeing more and more kids coming to us with a lot of anxiety and depression and things like that. So that's why I had to bring this. So emotional intelligence is also about basically about effectively controlling one's own emotions, and it is about being less impulsive. It's about developing higher cognitive and social intelligence, and they have shown that kids who are emotionally intelligent show better SAT scores. They cope with stress better. They are more socially adept, and they are liked by their friends better. And we all know that yoga helps with EQ, and hence they also improve SAT scores. This one slide is enough for us to market yoga classes for children and youth. Intelligence, yogic perspective. Aurobindo says it very beautifully. 3 levels of intelligence. Level 1 is the crude perspective discrimination. That is, we have, it's a stimulus and a response, right? Manas, on the screen of Manas, we get some impressions. What kind of impressions? They can be sensory impressions. They can be impressions from the vasanas, anything. The screen of Manas that we have has impressions on it, and we react based on that. So that is the first level of crude perspective discrimination. The second level is the mature buddhi, the power of reasoning. That is, one can discriminate based on morality. We basically have, for matured and genuinely cultured organism, we can say, or human, has matured power of reasoning. And we can compare the first two, the first one with ego, and the second one with the superego of Freud, the level 1 and level 2, and I think that's where they stop. The third one that Aurobindo talks about is the pursuit for pure truth. That is, we all have innate within us a basic quest for truth. That is the immutability. That is, what is this beyond this mutable world, that is transient world? There must be something beyond this, is always there, even among the most primitive of our human instinct, right? We all know that death is not everything, for example, and that's why even the most primitive of our humans, in say thousands, 10,000 years ago, or 20,000 years ago, we can say that they have had various belief system where they conceived heaven, hell, they conceived afterlife. Egyptians, they did their pyramids and stored their mummies, thinking, okay, someday something will happen. So every one of us has had, Homo sapiens, we can say, have had this little pursuit for the pure truth beyond life, that is. And that is the third level. I think modern psychology doesn't go heavily into this, but yogis have explored this in a much deeper way. Yogic buddhi is basically what intelligence, we can vaguely equate intelligence with yogic buddhi, but not completely, but vaguely we can. Buddhi, according to yogis, has been a structure that grows in strength with the unfoldment of personality. So as we grow in our personality, that is, as we unfold ourselves, and go after higher and higher truth, we will be able to become more intelligent. And that is something modern psychology doesn't delve into. So discriminative power, basically, intelligence is a discernment that we are able to see through our tendencies of the lower mind. The lower mind is always filled with anxiety and mental anguish, whereas the discriminating power, buddhi, is something that can see through all of this, and we can. It's not intelligence is going beyond the impulsive mind, as per yoga. And buddhi can go above the mental events when evolved. That is, mind can then be transcended. So buddhi can help mind be transcended. That is something modern psychology has not distinguished. They have not distinguished between mind and buddhi, mind and intelligence. It's basically intelligence is in the mind, whereas here buddhi is above the mind. At higher levels, buddhi will give way to more purely reflective states. So there, buddhi is now transcending the mind completely, and it's the states beyond mind, beyond buddhi, that are difficult to deal with. So we don't really stop at buddhi also. There are states even beyond buddhi, and that, of course, is not going to be an easy topic for us to think. That is the topic where actually the words stop. That's the topic where the yogi becomes muni, where he is silent, mauna and muni. So hence, that is the topic where we can only suggestively talk, but not talk for real, meaning the words lose the power. They say, then the vakya becomes lakshana vakya, as Vedanta says. It simply is a pointer. Lakshana vakya means it's a pointer. We simply we cannot explain it. So, but we have to somehow say it. So we are going to use lakshana vakya, that is to just point it. Just their pointers. So that is the topic for today. We just covered the intelligence and learning. And please feel free to read up on epistemology, on Pramana Shastra, and learn about the different modes of learning, different modes of how we know, what is avidya, what is absence of knowledge, what is prama and brahma, that is the right knowledge and the wrong knowledge. Brahma means wrong knowledge, prama means the correct knowledge. Vedanta, yoga, various darshanas have given different levels, different modes of knowledge. That is how we know what we know. Some have said it's pratyaksha, anumana, agama, that is only 3, and some have said it is 5, and so forth. So purva mimamsa, uttara mimamsa, all these have, and even in uttara mimamsa, that is Vedanta, different schools of thought have given different pramana, that is different proof of knowledge, so to say. And the Indian spirituality differs in not in ontology, that is different schools in, say, Abrahamic religions, they different say faiths in Abrahamic religions have different ontological elements. That is, maybe I define God in a certain way, you define God in a certain way, I define jiva, that is the humans, in a certain way. The relationship between jiva and jagat, that is the individual and the universe, has been defined in a certain way. Those are all ontological definitions which are different in different religions. Whereas in Indian science, the difference is not that of ontological elements as much as the difference is about how you know what you know. That is the proof of knowledge. That is where major differences exist, which is the debates exist, so to say. Some sages have said, I do understand that the agama or shabda pramana is okay. That is, I would like to think that the shabda pramana, that is the words of the voice, is one of the ways we learn to go to the ultimate truth. And however, some have said, that is the Nastika Vedanta, Nastika Darshana, for example, Buddha said, no, I'm not willing to go with Shabda Pramana because I figured it on my own. Maybe the way he might have said. But so these are the ways that they debate. But if you really followed slowly how or carefully and with a lot of exploration, you will see that that kind of debate leads you to take a step back from what you know. We are so involved in this world, assuming that we know what we know. But if you step back a little bit and ask yourself, do you know what you know? Is this what you know real? That one step, one gap between knowing and the knower, like what you know and who is the knower and the means of knowing, that is siddhi, sadhya, sadhana and sadhaka. When you start exploring these three, when you develop a gap between these three and start understanding, you will see that that is the real way of understanding the world. That's the real way to develop intelligence. That is the real way to then also move towards peace and tranquility, because then the real buddhi unfolds by just simply going the mode of pramana, that is understanding how you know what you know. That is the core subject of Indian spirituality. And Nyaya Shastra, that is epistemology, Nyaya Shastra, logic, as they say. It's not just logic, it's also about understanding how you know, Pramana Shastra. So logic, all the learning of ancient knowledge in spiritual science or even otherwise began with Nyaya Shastra, that is logic. And Sankhya also to some extent, Nyaya and Vaisheshika and Nyaya then eventually lead you to Sankhya and Yoga. So this is something I wanted to say as we end the subject. Do take interest in learning Nyaya Shastra. You will really become, you will develop insight into yoga also. Thank you. Any questions? I'm not here to, I'm not an expert on psychology, but I can talk about yoga to some extent. Yeah, people are on mute. They can unmute themselves. Okay. We, not that I'm that keen to answer questions at this point. It's already 7 o'clock. If you have any questions on this, we can discuss in our next session on yoga and psychology, in our in-person session. Okay. So write the questions to me if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwini.